Tan Sri for an exciting perspective given to us on how Malaysia has been shaping its economic policies in order to align itself with both China and India as well as the rest of the Asian market. The panel, I have, as you already know, the panel members are very distinguished people, and we have seen this morning a lot of discussions about the rise and growth of China and India in from a world economic standpoint, and we've also heard Tan Sri talk about how Malaysia has prepared its economic policies and economic institutions to align with it. Now the question that Tan Sri left in front of us was more in terms of how the business community is going to prepare itself to take advantage of this. So what we would do is, the panel discussion, we will focus on how Malaysian companies need to align, and I would request the panelists to focus on 3 aspects. The first aspect would be on the strategic marketing position of Malaysia over and beyond the economic positioning in terms of how to position itself within China, India, as well as the Asian region. We're also going to request the panel members to speak about the opportunity sectors that they see for the small and medium business enterprises from Malaysia. The large enterprises, of course, are looking at the opportunity that's available in China and India, but how the small and medium enterprises can take advantage, where are the opportunity sectors and where are the opportunity areas. And those who have experienced the market, what can we learn so that we can develop a pathway for success? The most important question is, what is the pathway for success for the companies that are interested in taking advantage of the rise in the entire East Asia region, as Tan Sri said? So that would be the broad spectrum in which we would like to have the discussions. So I'm going to start with a few questions, and please feel free to ask any question to the panel members. And you can direct the question through Peter or come up to the floor and ask any questions. But yeah, there are some mics over there. So let me begin by a very simple question that Tan Sri, you raised the question that the government has already done its part or is doing its part. The government is building. A very interesting comment from Tan Sri was something which I was really impressed with. Even though Malaysia's domestic market could be of only 30 million people or so, but she just 28 million people domestically living plus the people, immigrants taken together, let's assume 30 million people. But she made a very interesting comment. The domestic market is not a constraint because we have 500 million people in ASEAN, and then you add the 2+ billion people in China and India with whom we are developing a free trade agreement, which means the domestic market for Malaysia is more than 2.5 billion people, or even close to 3 billion people. So with that kind of a domestic market opportunity, how should we position Malaysia, first of all, from a marketing standpoint? How do we position our businesses and other strengths that we have to get the attention not only of Chindia, but the attention of the global players to look at Malaysia and its strengths? So I'll start with Tan Sri first.
Well, let me put it this way. It's like trying to woo a very pretty lady. Don't think you can go it just bilaterally, because that lady probably have 10 siblings and parents as well, so you have to humor them, bring them to your cause, right? So it's a lot of work to be done, and that's a reality. You marry into the family. Now, in the case of this East Asian family, that's what it is all about. If you want to go into that big family, it's the reverse. You want to go into a big family with so much potential, you can choose any of the members with which to operate. And we are talking about operating through Malaysia and with Malaysia to have that outreach to the bigger scenario or the bigger environment. But I'm sorry, I'm a more realistic person here. We have asked these questions ever since I was already a minister. To take advantage, what should we do? Which area should we go into China, India, and everywhere in this East Asia region? What need we do to go into the marketplace? Where are the sectors that we must invest in? For Malaysians, I'm not going to nag you, but I'm telling you, if any of you to ask a question like that, I'm going to say, what have you been doing all this while? Because when I was a minister, Noha and I did practically everything to tell you what we're doing and what you should be doing. You have been very quiet because maybe you didn't realize that we've been doing work for you. So today, it should be the second question. We've looked at all the opportunities. There's some problems. That's what governments like to hear. Problems of networking, problems getting through the customs, non-tariff barriers, practical problems of actually entering the market. I tell you, if you look at the MITI reports and everything, and all the reports that we did over the years, we took you to China. I told you, even well before Tiananmen, the first time I saw Ma Xiutong was lying in state in his casket, glass casket. That's how pretty long ago was that? And every year we went to China, bringing missions, and every year we tell our Malaysian business people, these are the new areas in China, these are the new areas in India, and so on and so forth. I think that's already in place. What I'd like to know, in fact, is what are your problems? We have this nice template set up for you, this framework already established. What are the practical problems you face as businesses? Is it foreign exchange problems? Is it problems of getting correspondent banks to deal with your LCs? Is it problems of communication? Is it problems of getting licenses, blah, blah, blah? And these are problems that you should be asking about now. Do not ask about what areas and sectors. There are books galore, experts galore telling you. I think know how you can write the book already, right? On subsectors to the minutest detail. What SMEs? My gosh, we had SME conferences and seminars that I opened and talked with, or talked to rather, when I was a minister. And when I'm no longer a minister, they still invite me to talk about this potential for SMEs. My gosh, how long are we going to take to talk about this? We're talking about Chindia rising, not setting. Do we need to wait for Chindia to set before we are really there? So I believe we must get going with already understanding what's in store and coming back to tell us tell us means governments and so on, what are the real concrete problems? Because sometimes bureaucrats, ministers, and governments don't really deal with the nitty-gritties of real business, right? And if you can complete the jigsaw puzzle, this Chindia rising in the context of East Asia will indeed be a very big potential that can challenge even the European Union in the near future. Even the European Union has so many problems. We can also write a book on it, or books on it. So I'm sorry, I'm not the kind of conference guest that you are usually contending with. I'm somewhat different. Yeah.
Tan Sri, you make a very...
Don't ask. No asking about what's... We'll give you the books and we'll give you the free articles. Go and read.
You make a very important point, Tan Sri.
Yeah.
Well, let me turn to Dato Noor and say, Dato, why have the Malaysian, to what extent the Malaysian companies have geared up from your perspective and from your experience and knowledge, to what extent Malaysian companies are gearing up to take advantage of the rise in Chindia? We would like to know to what extent you think, and are we really poised to...
Before I answer that, actually you can ask the question to Tan Sri, because whatever views I have is the views of a person who have served under her for 20 years. So you can't help but be influenced by her thinking. Of course he's right. But anyway, Malaysian companies have taken advantage of whatever opportunities there are in China as well as India. I think our trade figures show that, China is now our largest market, our largest trading partner. That alone should indicate that we are already taking advantage. The question is whether it's enough or not. I think there's still a lot to be done, because one thing you have to understand is that China, although it's called the factory of the world, China cannot produce everything it needs. It still needs either for the purpose of its own domestic market or the purpose of fully integrating or providing a full spectrum of offering to the market. They still need to collaborate and source from other countries. So there's still a lot of opportunities for the rest of us. Like Tan Sri said, now it's not a question of whether there is opportunity or not. There is opportunity, there are opportunities, but the first thing you need to do is to go to these countries. No matter how much reading you have done, it's nothing like going there yourself. That's my response to you.
China as one country accounts for 12.6% of Malaysia's trade. compared to the US, our long-standing traditional partner, exports rather, yeah, 9.5%. Hong Kong, 5.1%. Of course, Hong Kong is part of China. You put that together, that's already 17.7%. And India, starting at 3.3%. And so therefore, you see China and India already featuring in our statistics, especially China. It's gone up. It was just very small before, where we had to do business via Hong Kong, and through Pernas, the now defunct trading company, you have to pay 5% commission, so to speak, by going through Pernas to go into China. Now no longer, it's direct trade, and 12.6% of our exports go to China. Those who are in China, I may tell you my own personal experience. The first time I went to see a Malaysian facility in China was a Malaysian company setting up the first overseas mattress making company. At that time, they discovered that people who got married had to wait about 6 months to buy a mattress. You can imagine, honeymooners without mattresses. And they went in to fill that vacuum, and they made mattresses, not the kind that we know, not the springy, orthopedic types, but mattresses made of coconut coil, and very simple mattresses, just better than the, much better rather than just the foam little mattress that people used to have, even then at that time. They were very successful. Then we went in with the wood-based products, making furniture, knockdown furniture for domestic consumption, and on, until we went in a big way with the hospitality industries, the Shangri-Las, yeah, and many other services sectors. Retail, Pakson has got so many retail outlets in China, departmental stores. Pakson is Malaysian. And many who are Malaysians, but with Chinese names, because they locally incorporate the company, given the right, appropriate, acceptable Chinese names, but Malaysian. These are the early birds who didn't conferences to be told about China. When we went to China, they came along. And we talked about China, they listened. I know there are many of us, I'm sure it's the same everywhere in India and so on, where they still talk about what are the impacts and challenges when people are already making money in China. So I'm sorry, I'm very concerned about Malaysians, or anybody for that matter, in East Asia, who still debate about it. Maybe the next conference should be calling people to tell you exactly what to do, what the pitfalls are, because that's very important for them. The bankers want to know. It's not easy to set up business, of course, anywhere in the world outside your own town, but there it is. You must be able to surmount all the difficulties for long-term potential. Sorry, take time, but I need to do that. Otherwise, I make it into a speech, and it'll be quite rambling. Thank you.
Thanks, Tan Sri. I think before we get to the question of the pitfalls, etc., Tan Sri, you make a very important point that the Malaysian companies seem to have lots of success in China and India, but is the story well known to everybody? And I'm going to turn to Dr. Paul and ask the first question to say, how have we done in terms of telling the success stories to our own people or to the rest of the world?
My experience is a little bit limited. I went to India in 1970, and as you know, I'm in education and training. I found it very difficult to enter the Indian market. 30 years later, I tried again, but I was still not very successful in Chennai and Mumbai. In fact, we lost a little bit of money, partly because, and I have proved one point, that Blue Ocean strategy doesn't work. Because it has to be contextualized according to the time. We were so early, and the state bureaucracy was so powerful that it would restrain you and constrain you. I entered China through Taiwan. I went to Quemoy Island or Jinmen very early, 1976. And from the island, I looked into Fujian. I said, when would the Malaysian government allow Malaysians to enter into China? So finally, I entered China in 1986. I toured all the universities and governments in many provinces in China, but nobody understood me. Nobody understood private education. They just stared at me and said, education belongs to the state, it's free. And the pay of a professor was about 400 ringgit. Now this same people teach us how to do education and training. So within this period of time, they have advanced so fast. Now, when I went into China, this is my own personal way of looking at business. I made one commitment. I started to buy some shares of companies. I didn't know what these companies were, and it was very difficult to buy some shares because the banking system was not there, the stock exchange was very weak and poor. I bought some shares. 1 year later, I sent my son there to study. And he went there to study Mandarin. There's a reason why I did this. If you want to invest in a strange and foreign country, you must be emotionally involved. So I put some money there because it's a risk. And I put my own son there because my son, I have to monitor the safety and everything, And that was a very difficult time, And over the years, I adopted, as a matter of my framework of doing business, 4 A's. The first 4 A's. I want to find out whether certain types of services like education and training and programs are available in China. If not available, should I make them available? 2, how to make them appropriate, how to make them affordable, how to make them accessible, the 4 A's. Then the 4 S's. There must be some standards, whether industry standard, our standard, or global standard. The second S is, can I scale up the business? Scalability. Then the third S is sustainability in my business model and in my partnerships with the local people. And the last point is speed, However fast we are constrained by them. So we can be very efficient, but the supply chain over there need not be efficient. I just want you to know that behind every vice chancellor in a university in China, there is a party secretary, and he's the most powerful man, not the vice chancellor. So all your MOUs are a waste of time. And the 4 C's. When I do education and training, I must understand the consumer profile. The first C is the customer. 2, competitors. The Chinese are very brilliant copycats. When we first went for our first education exhibition, we got so excited because the 2,000-3,000 brochures we brought there was snapped up immediately. Then we discovered it's not the students who took them, it's the agents, the competitors. They're very smart. So the competitors are always waiting to kill you overnight. And they can copycat everything that you do. The third C would be my own company analysis. Do I have a deep pocket? Do I have the capabilities? Do I have the cultural mindset to enter China? I might be a Malaysian Chinese, but it doesn't make any difference. It does not make any difference, let me tell you. The last C is, I have to understand the collaborators' strengths, because I have to work with partners. You need a local partner, whether it's a government or some private institution. So my experience between the 2 countries is, because we did not show enough commitment in India, and because China, partly because the rules are not clear and so on, it became an advantage. So it's a cowboy country, And these people are willing to break all the laws and regulations. But entering China 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago, and now, is totally different. The entry cost is very high for Malaysians. First, the renminbi has appreciated 15 to 20%. 2, the inflation is very bad, so everything is 30 to 40%. The wages are high, land costs, rental, everything has gone up. So if you enter now, compared to those who entered earlier, it will be very difficult. If you want to enter China, if you don't have a time frame of at least 10 years, don't ever go into China. Be prepared to lose for the first 5 years. That's my experience.
Tan Sri, you mentioned about how you overcome some of the barriers that Dato' Paul was saying, that when you're dealing with China particularly, you are dealing with people who are secretaries, etc.
Yeah. Normally when people go to a country, you just meet your counterpart, the minister, and be finished with it. Not in China. You go meet your minister because you happen to know the person, and you have dinner, nice casual dinner. The real hard substance to be talked about is with the secretary to the Chinese party of that particular province, region, and so on. And I've always done that all the time. And you get rest assured that when you do that, the message gets through to the policymakers. So there is a very clear demarcation between the power of the party and that of so-called government, because we perhaps are not used to that system, And in India, of course, I agree with Paul. The bureaucracy can kill you. The bureaucracy of India has cost me a lot of gray hair, which I've now covered with a lot of dye. Because in negotiations of the free trade area, Doc, with Indian bureaucracy, the ministers understood, the bureaucracies refused to budge in. To the point that when I became rude and told the minister, please, Kamal Nath, Kamal, you're the minister, make the decision, and you officers, please leave it to your minister to decide. And finally, we had to call him alone into a room. And finally, I talked with him alone by a glass barrier next to the kitchen in the hotel before the formal meeting were to start, because I knew it was going to be a failure. Where I told him, Kamal, at the rate that your officers are proposing to open up the Indian market for products of interest to Malaysia, for example, palm oil, which you are talking about, you're going to open up in 2022, by that time, you will be ashes, because you'll be cremated. I will be dust, because I will be buried, because we will both be dead. And those were my terse remarks, very officious, and yet, I think, full of impact. And when I went in and I told the meeting exactly what has transpired, I said, that's my message. You go on with these dates of 2022 and blah, 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 please. So you see, sometimes the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. I don't know how to paraphrase Shakespeare. But the problem is this, there is potential. And today I'm so glad to see there's movements, incremental movements, no doubt, in the Indian bureaucracy towards this regionalization. Unlike China, they were the ones who proposed the East Asia Economic Community. But they saw the potential. They can't produce everything true. They also want to come into our markets, and they know that as neighbors, we probably can compete. They know very well that we are resilient people. Of course, Paul, very right. That's why I didn't want you to start talking, what are the sectors to the generation of 2011? My God. See, Paul, I just told you, you're a bit too late, but I'm not disheartening you, but it's a fact. Unless you're prepared to pay the cost. I'm talking about the time we first went to China 15 years ago to seriously put our feet down there. Where were you, most of you? Sorry, not you, but I mean, where were the business people? We don't wait for Chindia to rise high noon before we go in. The moment we see rising, we should be there. That's my concept. And of course, India has moved. I'm telling you, sometimes real practical experience can actually help others along. And I'm glad that Paul is there to help out. I can tell you a lot of experiences with India, but unless you want to know plenty, so does know how. And we tell them to the private sector of Malaysia, this is what's going to happen. You know, like they ask you whether you have Washington. I said, what Washington? You know how you were there, right? Well, you know how Merlin. Did you carry Washington? Yeah, the only one who can help you is George Washington. I said, excuse. And the officer said, George Washington, this is at the airport. Well, you know what we are trying to do? We're trying to bring out from the plane those collapsible boards upon which you stick banners and you stick, what do you call this? Posters. We carry them all over the world because sometimes it's difficult to source locally when you go to places that are new in terms of development. So bring them. These are things that we need to do. These are tools of trade. They want to tax us some thousands of dollars US. And then went on and on and on, everybody arguing this duty-free. And they said, only George Washington can help you. And they didn't, of course, our people didn't understand. Until some bright spark realized, oh, wow, is that what they meant? They promptly told me, I promptly told the minister. I said, we're going to have the seminar afterwards. I'm sure one of my participants is going to ask you, what is this about even asking for Washington to come and save us at the airport? And blah, 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 blah. So I say, you better look into this, you know. This is a very bad experience. And this is not for the private sector, it's for us, the government side, bringing in cheap, collapsible panels to stick posters on. That was India before. Today, I think there's been many changes. But we have to come in quick. Don't wait for a perfect Indian market to go in. And of course, just now you asked, why don't we tell the story of how I think these business people are too busy trying to cope with the businesses to go and tell everybody, hey, I'm in China, I'm in India, I'm successful. It's the fact that they're successful is already good enough for us, right? And if you need them, call them. They'll tell you, like Paul. But they will not talk. They will not, because it's a lot of work there, you know. You can't just leave it and go back and play golf. Good night to your business.
Thanks. Paul.
I think like what Pan Sri has said, before we enter a country, we must know its history and culture. India is different and China is very different. The Chinese people, or rather China is not a nation the way certain countries are defined as a nation. It is a civilization state with about 3,000 to 4,000 years. So the Chinese government and the bureaucrats look at themselves very differently. For example, most of us look at the compass in terms of north, south, east, west. The Chinese people also have the center. So when you are in the center, you look at the world very differently. That's why you are called the Middle Kingdom. So China, throughout its history, have never reacted the way the Western powers, in particular US, reacts. It doesn't have knee-jerk reactions to a lot of problems. Because, as Professor has said earlier this morning, it's looking into the next 1,000 years. It can outwait you, you know. Because do not forget, China invented the Japanese game of Go, which is very different from the international chess game, which finite moves, you know. You cannot computerize the Go game, you know, because you have infinite ways of starting a game and attacking you and defending and so on. So the cultural part is very important, that the protocol and cultural part in Chinese conduct and business negotiation. Let me give you a very simple illustration of how we failed, because we were so naive and ignorant. About 20 years ago, I met some vice chancellors, and later on, I sent some very good people there. But they were very young, 35 years. And the president of the university was 65, you know. And of course, he was